Garry Kasparov, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I'm so happy to one meet you and hear your perspective and thoughts on how these important technologies like Bitcoin um, can be part of a toolbox for building a better world. And I don't want to avoid the hot topics that are near and dear to your heart, Garry. I mean, obviously, you are a well-known and well-regarded champion of human freedom. You are certainly no friend of authoritarians and tyrants, and you are very loud in that regard at pushing back against that. And your message of and your desire for human freedom, I think, is uplifting, and your message is very strong. And one of the things that brings us here today is, obviously your work with, in fighting back against that, but also your work with the Human Rights Foundation that you are very much involved in, and is co-producing this event with us here at Block. So I want to just kind of get started here and kind of get into it, and really hear from you, like how you see technologies like Bitcoin potentially like being an important tool in this fight for human dignity and freedom and democracy in the world.
Mike, thank you very much for this flattering introduction. So I can also add to our audience that, yeah, I was born and raised in the Soviet Union. And as someone who was born and raised in the unfree country, so I have a very different sense of individual freedom. Because people here in America or in Europe, uh, uh, I meant West Europe, so they were born and raised in a free world, in a world of freedom. And very often they just take it for granted. So they cannot evaluate, the uniqueness of these rights and freedoms that are not available to 60+% of the population on our planet. Um, and as a chairman of Human Rights Foundation, I regularly meet and interact with other dissidents and human rights activists and freedom fighters all over the world. And looking at America, looking at Europe, so we always got puzzled. So how come that people just in these countries do not appreciate the greatness of freedom and don't recognize that you have to fight back, even in the free world, because the freedom is very fragile thing. So and while you cannot compare American government or European governments, even European bureaucracy that is being portrayed as ultimate evil in Brussels, with totalitarian states, with um, uh, inefficiency and cruelty of unfree regimes, bureaucracies. Um, but the way any bureaucracy operates, whether it's in Washington, in Brussels, in Moscow, or in Beijing, they just look for expansion of their powers. And I'm grateful that you, among others, doing such an important thing to bring us tools to fight back. I'm not, just it's a radical libertarian, but I always, very sensitive about the balance between the state power, which is also important to protect me and just protect my rights, and the attempts to encroach on my personal territory.
Mhm.
And just giving this, probably it's a lengthy introduction of my overall views. I want to add that it's the I I confession first. I totally overlooked the birth and early days of Bitcoin. I remember that Alex Gladstein from Human Rights Foundation talked about it 9 years ago at one of the Oslo Freedom Forums, and okay, big deal, so to speak. I didn't pay enough attention. Now I'm fully convinced that we are dealing with something that is fundamentally important for protecting our freedom, because crisis after crisis, and I'm not talking now about even war in Ukraine, or Chinese concentration camps in Xinjiang, and other things, crimes committed by totalitarian regimes and all sorts of thugs and terrorists around the world. I'm talking about crises that we are facing here in the free world. And it seems that we are consciously or subconsciously accepting governments' rights to take away some of our freedoms, just to enlarge the area of their control that affect directly or indirectly our well-being. And why I think that's the Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, blockchain technologies, why they're important, because they benefit individuals. And I'm trying to be objective and understand the criticism. It could help bad guys. It could open sort of new creative ways for money laundering. I mean, money laundering did exist, from the moment money was invented, and big players with shady money, they always had willing partners in the free world to move the money around. So why don't we allow individuals to actually to exercise extra freedom with their life savings, with their money, and also we just have to respond to never ending and actually growing threat of the central banks unleashed powers that could just spike the inflation, and by doing so, basically, killing our savings. So, well, overall, I see that Bitcoin as the kind of golden standard, and crypto and blockchain technologies. Those are the elements that are fundamental to move forward with the concept of freedom in the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And obviously, given my work, I agree with you on all of that. One of the things that I want to ask you about, and obviously you already pointed to the fact that there's a lot of people who are critical of this technology. They don't really see a purpose to it. One of the things that Alex Gladstein talks a lot about is this idea of like financial privilege, this idea that we live in, like, here in the United States, we have a functioning banking system. The money does work. People obviously are not happy about the current issues with inflation, and so on and so forth, as no one should be. But the reality is like we have a functioning system, and there are so many people in the world that either live without a functioning financial system, or the financial system has been weaponized against them. And it seems to me that like that is like maybe like that is like the most important issue at play here with a technology like Bitcoin. It's not, and I think a lot of people actually look at, say, something like it, and unfortunately there's people who don't help this perception, but that see Bitcoin as actually hostile to the idea of government itself. And I think you put it best in your opening statement there about the fact that, like, we need government to make, I mean, the purpose of government, I think the legitimate purpose of it, right, is to ultimately allow us to organize society and resolve conflict in a peaceful way. That's what we do. We build rules to resolve conflict in peaceful ways. And but in order to maintain freedom and to prevent government and institutions from becoming too powerful, you need checks and balances, and you need to give people power to fight back against. I mean, like the ability to vote in new politicians is obviously part of that. The ability of individuals to protest, to use their money to support causes they support, and or use their money or boycott things that they don't support. And the risk that money can be weaponized, and I think you probably have some things to say about that, given what you focus on, is a real risk, and I think maybe an important thing that goes overlooked in terms of the maintenance of a free and democratic society.
Yeah, you ask many questions there, and I think it's just the trouble is that we while talking about this technology, we always have to keep in mind that they have a different purpose in a free world and unfree world. So let's start with unfree world and my work as a chairman of Human Rights Foundation, because you talked about countries like Venezuela, or Afghanistan, or other places where government is in total control, and people have no way to use the official institutions, even if they are functional. So in many places they are not functional, but they have to look for ways to support their activities. Or let's talk about Belarus
Mhm.
or Russia. Um, Now, in these extreme cases, so the Bitcoin and other cryptos could serve as the tool, uh, powerful and very often only tool, to help these people continue their fight and to basically stay afloat. Um, and here the fact is that it could be used also by governments of these countries to do some shady business. It's probably saves these activists from losing this source of income, because that's fact. The shady governments, these guys also need the crypto world. So that's why it's even in Afghanistan you have a crypto exchange functioning some in some strange forms. So that's why we have to remember that the Bitcoin and other forms of crypto are very important for political and sometimes physical survival of those who are, as we speak, fighting against the oppressive regimes around the globe. So that's one side of the story. So moving to the free world now, and about government abuses, and look at the central banks. They can keep printing money, and by doing so, they cause inflation, which can it's works against our interests. So it's printing money is the most exquisite form of borrowing, and you're not being asked, and very often is being done by unelected officials, and the political parties, irrespective to their ideology, they're always behind it. Conservatives, liberals, at the end of the day, I didn't see just throughout 3 decades that I'm following American political life that there was a real opposition to uncontrolled spending, no matter who was in the White House and who was in control of the U.S. Congress. So that's why we also need tools that will allow us to stay competitive and make sure that by the fact that we control these funds, the governments will have to limit their interference. It's more like about checks and balances. It's not about to survive, but it creates a counterbalance. It
Mhm.
creates a critical mass on the side of the public to prevent government from going too far. And also, yeah, I think we can just go back to a bit of philosophical element of this conversation. It's what I call inevitability. Why should we, argue about digital forms of payments if we have more and more elements of our life shifting from offline to online?
Mhm.
And Bitcoin is a natural development of the payment system that went, that goes all the way back to the time where we use seashells. It's every phase of the development of our society required new forms of payment.
Mhm.
When the paper money had been introduced, in the beginning of 18th century, so it was also just this it's an like open sea of speculations, and also concerns because it was new instrument. Yeah, okay, everything takes time, but I think it has been we have to view it as the steady development, of our society. And the fact is that so many things that are being conducted now online just requires the payment system that will be aligned with the way we do business and also interact with each other.
Yeah, I think like, yeah, I think that's like very on point, and certainly, and I think actually reminds me of how Jack puts this, right? He talks about Bitcoin as being the native currency of the internet, that it's native to the internet, and it is like a money that like allows us to start thinking more in terms of the reality that so much of our economy and our society is internet native. So I definitely agree with you on
But
that.
it also, but let me just, when since you mentioned Bitcoin, and this is it's as the it's an element, of controlling the the power of the state. So it's also, it it's built on math, it's
Mhm,
built on science, it's built on the facts that cannot be changed with the change of the governing party.
mhm,
And I think that's what makes people more comfortable,
mhm.
because they know exactly how many of the coins are available, and they know that, math stands on the way of any attempts from one group or another to blow up the foundation of this currency.
Yeah.
While with US dollars, I have no idea. I mean, even forget about counterfeit. So it's money. So you're still talking about, the US national debt, $31 trillion. So this is, I don't know how to even count it. So this I can't even imagine. This is it's insane amount. So and it's, like it or not, but it just, it puts pressure on us, and more on our children and our grandchildren. While with Bitcoin and, related forms of other cryptocurrencies, we're dealing with something that is not in control of elected or unelected officials.
Mhm. No, 100% agree with you. Um, to maybe like change gears a little bit, and maybe uh, ask you a question, one that haunts me um, a lot, and people who follow me on Twitter or talk to me in a lot of private conversations will have heard my concerns on this, and I think you share them. But I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I often find myself in conversations with family and friends and individuals, and I increasingly hear from people sometimes an almost sense that democracy has failed in the world, that that like democracy isn't working, that like we it's like they don't really know like what's wrong, but they don't have faith in the democratic system anymore. And when I hear this, I get really, really worried that this is exactly what the authoritarians and tyrants in the world want to hear, and it's exactly the kind of sort of vacuum of and sorrow for society that is fertile ground for um, quite quite honestly like malevolent people in the world to take advantage of. And I wanted to get your sense of that, like how like are you worried that there is a general decline in faith and democracy in the world? um, I don't want to make things like too political, and I don't want to get into partisan issues in the United States in particular, so I try to keep this high level. But like, do you worry about that?
I do, absolutely, and that's why 5 years ago, actually almost 6 years ago, I formed here in this country Renew Democracy Initiative (RDI) that was built to address threats to democracy coming from both sides. I'm nonpartisan. I can present my impeccable record of criticizing 6 consecutive U.S. presidents, starting from Bush 41. So 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Yeah, so I think my record is clean, and I could see that we have threats. Speaking about this country, the United States, coming from radicals on either side of the political spectrum. On one side, on the right, you have cult of personality. On the left, you have cult of ideology, and both just are very detrimental for the interest of democracy. So we have attacks on liberal democracy from one side and market economy on the other side. And again, that's wrong, and it just brings me back to what I said in the beginning of our conversation. People do not appreciate the value of freedom. They take everything for granted. So when I hear these complaints about democracy failure, so it makes me both sad and angry. uh, you want to see the advantage of democracy? Look at the outcome of pandemics. We got virus from China and vaccine from America. So all these talks about superiority of authoritarian regimes, absolute nonsense. China, with all these so-called accomplishments and having probably 6 months head start in working on vaccine, failed. You don't want to use Sinovac. We use Pfizer or Moderna. And look at the lousy performance of Putin's armies in Ukraine. And these conversation about the failure of democracy, it's so it feels me so sad and as I said, angry. Ukrainians just keep showing us that freedom was worth fighting for and dying for, and they single-handedly stopped Putin's armies. They did what NATO was built for in 1949, saving Europe from Russian invasion. And how on earth, we could complain about ineffectiveness of democracy if we could see time and again that democracy always prevails? It's slow, yeah, it has tons of problems, but never turn self-criticism into self-flagellation. As Winston Churchill said, I'm not sure it's exact phrase because it has been paraphrased so many times. Democracy is the worst form of governing, but still it's better than any other. And now we see this proof. There were 16 years, according to Freedom House Index, of the decline of democracy. And it ended up with the war in Ukraine because our recognition, or actually our unwillingness to recognize the advantage of democracy led to this vacuum, ideological vacuum. But vacuum doesn't stay vacuum long. So it's you move away, somebody gets in. And we know exactly who gets in. It's Putin, Xi Jinping, Ayatollahs, Taliban, Al Qaeda. So they fill this vacuum. And all sorts of extremists on both sides, whether it's America or Europe, that try to tell us, oh, yeah, there are easy solutions. You just have to abandon this freedom or that one. No, it's this democracy is a process. And the founding fathers created just a document, which is, I think it's a living document that helps us to correct the extremes and also find the right approach. That's why I'm not, as much as I'm against those who are trying to undermine the impulse of constitution, I'm equally opposing those who just take it, to a comma. Look, it's just, they did their best, the best they could nearly 250 years ago. But, it was a time, it was a muzzled muskets. They didn't have, any idea about, the guns that could kill could kill 500 people in 1 minute. So it's recognizing that democracy, it's something that we have to live through and we have to correct every time. That's why we need these new tools. Going back to the beginning of our conversation, it's very important we have tools that will allow our active participation. That's what also bothers me. That is, people talk about democracy as as being in decline, as if it's not your job to make it work. And that's why giving every individual a tool to contribute to strengthening democracy, to make it more adequate to the challenge of the 21st century. That's what is important, and that's why I'm a full supporter of any tool, so financial or otherwise, that allow people to participate directly in making our democracy more resilient and more beneficial for all of us.
Well, Garry, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that, I think democracy is an important value that I believe, I think it is the greatest form of governing that we have so far figured out. As you quoted Winston Churchill's famous remark that democracy is democracy is the worst system of government except all others. I think that was his quote. And yes, like it's messy. It can feel slow. It can be very like the fights that go on can be very upsetting. But the fact is that like it can also be self-correcting. We can change things. We can say that policy didn't work. We can make a new one. And that is certainly something that there are many people alive today in this world that wish that policies could change because they're clearly failing, and they do not change because those policies are about serving those in control and not those who they govern. So
you said important things about self-correcting mechanisms that do not exist in non-democratic countries. and also about our participation, individual participation in the process that also is banned in the unfree world.
Well, I think we have to leave it there.
Yep.
We've run out of time, and I think that was a good place to end, and gives people things to think about. Garry, I want to thank you for taking the time and participating in this event. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work at the Human Rights Foundation. Thank you for your work more broadly in the fight for human dignity, freedom, and democracy. So really
Mike, thank
appreciate
you for inviting me.
it. Thank you.